listening to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and more. Here's your host, KickedTripod.
Good morning, Overwatch League fans. This is your Overwatch League Daily episode for March 14th, 2018. Today I've got a bit of a surprise. I'm joined by Overwatch League analyst Crumbz to get his insight and analysis on some of the big stories in Overwatch League. But first, we did have some news over the break. The Dallas Fuel have mutually parted ways with main tank XQC after XQC received a second fine and second suspension since the beginning of the season. The Dallas Fuel tank line has been in a bit of a turmoil so far as Taimu has flexed into the main tank role, while Coco, who is a mainstay with MVS, has seen very little play. In fact, I tried to do some digging on Winston's lab in Liquipedia, and the last stats I could find from him were February 10th against the LA Gladiators. So that is what has changed in Overwatch League since Sunday. But let's go ahead and take a look at tonight's matches, brought to you by patreon.com/OWL Daily Show. We're more than halfway through Stage 2. We've got some interesting matches to start the week. For the first match of the evening, we have the Boston Uprising, who have swept or been swept in every match of Stage 2 so far, as they go up against the Dallas Fuel, who, to say the least, have had a very interesting beginning to their inaugural season. Both of these teams find themselves at 2-4 in Stage 2. For the second match of the evening, the New York Excelsior will look to take on the Seoul Dynasty. Both of these teams are at the top in the season and stage standings, and through 6 matches in Stage 2, each has only lost 5 maps. And then for the final match of the evening, the Philadelphia Fusion, who are sitting in the middle of the pack at 3-3 for the stage, will go up against the Shanghai Dragons, who have just 2 map wins out of 24 maps played in Stage 2. The action kicks off at 4 p.m. Pacific time at overwatchleague.com or twitch.tv/overwatchleague. Here's my interview with Crumbz, where we discuss his experience with analysis, punishments in Overwatch League, the Houston Outlaws, and more. Well, Crumbz, first of all, thank you for joining me. I mean, your schedule has to be insane. We've been trying to get this one on the books, but Overwatch League has kept you pretty busy.
Yeah, with the 4 days a week right now, and just trying to take the other days off just to improve myself, eating, working out a lot. It's been pretty hectic for me recently.
Well, and I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit. So you come from a really extensive League of Legends background, as I believe in the research I've done, player, coach, caster. You've basically done it all there. How are you, now that you're over in Overwatch, how are you preparing and staying up to date as an analyst?
Well, I think as an analyst, you still just have to be very aware of what the entire state of the scene is. And so big things that I was doing in League of Legends that you have to do in everything is you have to keep up with the forums. You have to keep up with the platforms in which players speak their mind, in which teams create content that might be revealing to what they're planning on doing. So once you keep up with all that, then you're watching your VODs and you're watching the games, you're watching content that is dedicated to analyze the games, and you go and you try it. It's a pretty extensive process, and that's really what takes up most of the time, the preparation, because when it comes down to actually doing your job, you basically are just talking for 2 minutes. So it's all about the prep.
Is there a big difference between the stuff that you look for and analyze in League of Legends versus Overwatch, or is a lot of it transferable?
Some of the concepts are transferable, so you just have really general concepts like viewing heroes as a resource and their cooldown management as well as positioning. So you've got some general idea of abilities, or rather skills that transfer, but for the most part, you're just letting the game play out and just trying to see what the game story is telling you in terms of what you have to really be looking out for. Otherwise, you're just typically going to be missing a lot of things if you're looking at each game with a specific thing in mind.
And then last question, and then I want to jump into some stuff about the league. But from your perspective, we've got, early December is when we had the preseason. We are now just about halfway through March. So, 3.5, 4 months worth of, or 3 to 3.5 months worth of Overwatch League. How have you seen analysis from the Overwatch League desk change and adapt from then until where you guys are now?
Do you mean how the desk has changed?
Well, yeah, just the type. Are you guys still trying to still kind of focusing on analysis in the same way, or have you found some things that maybe do or don't work better than others when it comes down to analyzing the game and presenting it from the desk?
I think on the desk, we would just try to refine everything that we were doing before, just what we thought worked, just try to really improve on it and try to keep everything fresh, because there's a lot of desk segments, and the last thing you want is things to become stale. So we're always just looking on new ways to improve, and each stage is really just a way of looking for things to get better at during the analyst desk segments. And as for the exact analysis, I think the games have changed. So you have the lack of Mercy meta, which makes things a little bit more exciting than just looking for who has Valkyrie and who used Valkyrie in a situation. So besides that, I think it's forced us to, or at least myself, to look at the game in an even more critical eye now that Mercy has been subdued.
Yeah, there's a lot going on right now in Overwatch League, in the meta, between the teams, and I think kind of the big thing that's kind of brought itself into the forefront is the first two stages of Overwatch League have had at least some level of controversy. We've seen 5 players since the beginning of the league suspended and or fined. We've seen a coach given a formal warning. And I was just kind of interesting, since you've been around the block a few times, does this feel pretty normal to you in the sense, or is this something that is unique to Overwatch?
Well, every game has its laws be enforced a lot of the time, so it's definitely not unique to Overwatch. It is very it's an integral part of the fact that this is an entertainment scene, and for a lot of people, being engrossed in esports is kind of like it's a lifestyle, and so sometimes it gets to be the drama that people get from these events that happen. So it definitely has its place in a lot of esports as part of the entire entertainment product of what it is. It's nothing to say that it's something forced, but it's just a habit of competition. Other than that, I mean, it happens everywhere, really, even out of esports.
Do you think that as rules become more defined, and as the league matures, do you expect this type of stuff to be less frequent going forward?
I don't think it has a lot to do with the league itself, rather than the way that. I mean, that's a tough question, really, but I would imagine that it would just decrease as of a habit of players understanding the behavior that is expected.
Sure.
And that would really be, I think, the biggest thing. And more, it's really a touchy subject, actually. But I think once the players understand the boundaries a little clearer, things would be better.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Houston Outlaws today when I had you. What do you make of the Outlaws' performance so far in Stage 2? It feels pretty contrasted from their performance in Stage 1.
I think a lot of the times what happens to teams, there's some sayings that you go around in esports where it's really the story behind the scenes of the team that can help you tell the story of what happens, of what's going to happen in the game. And I can't help but imagine that in a lot of these teams, and even in the Outlaws case, the things that are affecting this team just are happening outside of the game, where there's a lot of pressure on these guys. They're working for a very large organization in a large scene. Might be new to a lot of these people. Internal conflicts, or not conflicts, but misfortunes. We know that has happened within the team. I get the feeling that the team has also set expectations maybe too high for themselves after the first split, and then things might have dialed back to the previous meta where they struggle and other teams had the upper hand in these situations. So I think there's a big compound of things, and then you have the Tracer versus Tracer matchup that is typically the simple analytical, like it's in the game kind of perspective. But I think that other things might be affecting this team, as well as plenty of other teams, which some come forward with this information in their own videos. Some are more subtle with it, but it's definitely a big part.
Do you think so? There's been a lot of speculation right now that one of the biggest things holding the Outlaws back, we'll say during the game, is the Outlaws' lack of the term that I use is a carry tracer, a tracer that is a strong duelist, generally puts up kind of best in class numbers. You think of Carpe, Sabiolbi, those types of effect. Those types of tracers, and the Houston Outlaws are probably one of the only, if not the only team, maybe the Shanghai Dragons, who don't have somebody in this quote unquote carry tracer role. And by far, they're the only one who's doing as well as they are without that carry tracer role. Do you think that is going to be a big issue for them going forward, assuming that we don't see some meta changes that either directly affect Tracer or affect her by changing other heroes?
I think moving forward, it's unlikely that Tracer becomes too affected, but I think what the Outlaws are, their main issue with the Tracer thing is I don't think it's that they lack a Tracer that can play or has played at a carry level. I think their players have clearly shown that they are capable of playing at that level. It's not that they don't have the ability to do so, but they're just dealing with very big gaps of inconsistency in these kinds of play styles. So it looks like they certainly don't have that. And it also appears that they're very confident in their Tracer play, but are just becoming frustrated with the inability to translate what in their minds is good Tracer play from, I'm assuming, in their practice into the game. So I think it's the issue that goes past Tracer and into something else.
Something that has been really interesting in between stage 1 and stage 2, the Gladiators picked up Fissure from the London Spitfire, and the Houston Outlaws will actually play the Gladiators. And since adding Fissure, the Gladiators have looked really good. Do you think that Houston can beat the Gladiators or will beat the Gladiators on Thursday?
Well, with Fissure, I mean, this is a great story already with the fact that this guy was able to take down London last week. So that you have to consider that one when looking at Gladiators versus the Houston Outlaws. And the Gladiators have been playing a very strong dive style, especially the combination of Asher with Fissure. I mean, they've been very coordinated together. And I think that's going to give a lot of trouble to Houston. They've been really struggling when Tracers have a very strong performance, and Asher has been doing exactly with that. And with how good Fissure is playing, I have a hard time seeing the Houston that we've seen in stage 2 altogether show up and take down the surging Gladiators. I mean, if we saw Houston in stage 1, sure, that's a different question. But right now, I think Gladiators have a significant upper hand almost, right? Because we haven't seen much consistency out of Houston.
Do you think that the Gladiators are a team that, with Fissure, right now are a top tier Overwatch League team that can compete? I mean, we've already seen them beat London, so we know that they can compete with some of the best Korean rosters that we have. Do you think that they're a team that can find themselves towards the top of the league, maybe later on in the season?
But I think right now they're on a 3-game winning streak with the loss happening to Seoul. So it's too early to say that they're definitely a top competing team. I know that they feel like they could have taken the map victory over Seoul. Remember, this is, again, with the addition of Fissure very early on. But a couple more games before I think we can say that the Gladiators is definitely a top team. They are making their case for it, and they're definitely at the top where you have every team that is not Seoul, London, and New York. They're definitely in that pile now. But whether they can actually overtake any of those top two teams will require more than just one victory over them and a bout of consistency.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I like where the Gladiators are now. I really like the identity that they seem to have found with Fissure. I don't like to pin a whole lot against iRemix, but you could tell that there was just there was a disconnect with the Gladiators in stage one, and it really feels that with the addition of Fissure, even with limited practice, they just seem to be playing a lot better.
I mean, it's not even iRemix. It's the fact that you have Fissure that is just so damn good. Like, really, who are you going to compare next to Fissure at this point and be like, wow, like no matter what, the way that Fissure is currently playing versus the way that other tanks are currently playing, it's I think Fissure is the number one tank in the league. That's not even a very far-fetched statement right now. So, I mean, this guy is just single-handedly improving an entire team on top of that.
Yeah, he definitely is. The last team I wanted to talk to you about with, and then I'll let you get to bed. It's getting late, I know. The Shock. We're actually going to have Harsha, analyst for the San Francisco Shock, on the show tomorrow. But I wanted to get your thoughts on some of the moves that they've made this past week. They've got Moth and Architect. They just signed, and I know Monte Cristo has been over the moon for Architect for months now. Sinatra becomes eligible on March 21st. Super becomes eligible on March 28th. With these new additions, I know I'm asking you to bust out the crystal ball a little bit here, so I'm going to preface it with this is crystal ball type stuff. This isn't like, we're talking future here. How do you expect them to perform knowing the pieces that they're getting going into the end of stage 2 and beyond?
I think at best they would place in the batch of teams that is below the classic 3 of Seoul, New York, and London. At best, they are at the peak of that. Now, that seems to be a bit of a stretch, considering how good the other teams in that bracket still are and how much work they'll have to put in to get their synergy down. But now they'll have a dedicated Genji player, and now they'll improve their much needed for approval support department. So we haven't seen the full potential of many of these players unlocked because of these faults that needed to be addressed. So I'm very curious to see how far they can go, but I don't think there'd be any combination of team that you could make right now to say, yes, with confidence, they can overtake the current top 3.
And the Shock are in a really unique spot too, where they've got a really young team. Besides Dak and maybe Nomi, I believe the rest of these guys are like 21 and under, if I remember correctly. I don't have the ages with me right here in front of me, but at the very least, we know for a fact that this is the youngest team in Overwatch League. Do you like this idea that the Shock have taken, where in season 1 they may not finish the highest, but they've got what I would say is probably one of the most promising skill ceilings with these young players?
I think that when they select the players, I'm not so sure age is such a big factor into the equation. I think a lot of the time they might just be a coincidence for these players. Maybe it's just to have them to get along, but I can't imagine that they select players with having age for or plans for the future that far out to be already in place or in some departments at least, because there's a lot of DPS players on this team already, right? So if they're gonna be filling out these slots for some sort of later term investment, they're gonna have to get rid of some of the players very early on just to make room for their entire roster. It's definitely good to see these teams make late game, or rather multi-season moves though, because I think that's really what shows the complexity of the league, when you can have teams having different approaches to basically outrun each other towards what is hopefully a very long esports life for Overwatch.
Last question, and I didn't even put this one in the notes. This is what we're going to call a curveball here. Right now, who is your favorite player to watch in Overwatch League when you get to see them play? Who do you think is kind of the most interesting or most fun to watch for you?
I really just like watching Fissure. I like to play main tank myself. I play Winston a lot, so watching this guy makes me feel reinvigorated to play Overwatch. Every time he plays, I try to emulate something of what he's doing and apply it to my game, so I get to feel like I'm improving while watching him do a sick playing combination with the Tracer. And the story around it is even more interesting now that they beat London. So there's just a huge combination of factors that make Fissure my player to watch.
I love it. Well, Crumbz, thank you so much. I'm so glad we finally got the time to sit down and discuss some of Overwatch League. I really enjoyed your analysis from the desk. Love having you in the scene, and for real, thank you again so much for coming on.
Hey man, now that we have this set up, just message me on Discord. I'm glad to come up anytime.
My thanks to Crumbz for stopping by. That was such a cool interview for me. Make sure to follow him doing all of his awesome Overwatch League stuff on all the regular Overwatch League sites and things, and follow him on Twitter at ProfitCrumbz. If you missed it during the interview, I did kind of ninja announce that Harsha is going to be on tomorrow's show. So we're actually going to discuss the recent new additions of Architect and Moth and how Sinatra and Super might factor in to the Shock's game plan going forward. If you like the show, make sure to subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, or your podcast app of choice so you don't miss future episodes. You can also watch or listen to the show at winstonslab.com. You can also find links to everything at overwatchleaguedaily.com. And of course, email me with questions or comments at overwatchleaguedaily@gmail.com. My thanks again to Crumbz for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow with Harsha for another episode of Overwatch League Daily.